Well, rescue efforts have resumed in the Elliot Lake mall collapse, with several people still believed to be trapped under the rubble. Who should be held accountable for this tragedy? Joining us now to discuss this is criminal defense lawyer Edward Sapiano. Good to have you here with us. I want to start with this story because, you know, while this search is still ongoing, a lot of questions are now starting to pop up. Like, who knew what when? So many of the townspeople have said that there were problems with this mall, leaking, water problems, structural problems, and that this was an accident waiting to happen. Who is responsible and who can be held responsible?
Well, a number of people can be held responsible, both criminally and civilly. There's two avenues for redress here. The first thing to identify is what caused the collapse, structural problems somewhere along the way, and then identify who was responsible for that error, that negligent construction, if that was the case. I understand that there was a major renovations in 2006.
Right.
It's not likely those are the cause of this collapse, but the water damage that you speak of that people had noticed, that's quite probable. And if that's the case, the owner ultimately is responsible for maintaining a safe structure. So
now, would any of it fall back then on the engineers who do the inspections? Could it fall then on the government?
Well, that's the point. We have to analyze and look at what has been, when was it last inspected? Did it pass the inspection? I'm presuming it did. In which case, you know, government entities could be looked at as being partially responsible, particularly on the civil side. The owners thus far, actually, I was quite impressed. They actually went to court. You understand that the rescue mission was suspended. Yeah. Shocking. And yet
it never happened in 9/11, and that structure was, you know, more enormous and obviously compromised, and they didn't call that search off, but this one they did.
The entity charged with the responsibility is called Heavy Urban Search and Rescue. I mean, collapsed buildings are not something that's unpredictable and that you should be ready to deal with. And that was shocking. But the owner of the mall, surprisingly, immediately took steps, went to court to try and get an injunction to prevent the suspension of the rescue effort.
Right.
Which
and had, I guess, Mr. McGinty not stepped in, this would have stayed halted, correct?
It could have, indeed. So in terms of the owners of the building, they certainly will be looked at. They certainly do appear to be taking steps now that are very positive, even as we say, sort of second guessing the rescue team's efforts. But in terms of liability, there has to be found a level of negligence that is quite significant for criminal liability. And we'll be looking at any engineers who worked on the building. They'll be looking at people who inspected the building. Ultimately, the owners are responsible, but they could be perfectly reasonable in relying on experts, and so they could be absolved of responsibility in that regard.
Would we be looking at a charge of what? Criminal negligence causing death? What kind of charges, if this went criminal, would we be looking at?
Criminal negligence causing death, precisely, if it went criminal. More likely, we're going to see litigation in this civil field. Right. And quite possibly other legislation, both provincial and some federal, in terms of structural safety of buildings. So there are various statutes and various avenues for redress by the injured parties.
Do you see this turning into a class action? I mean, look, this is a mall that employs 400 people in that town. It's a town of, what, 15,000? So a large portion of this town works at this mall.
That's true. Fortunately, though, it appears, I understand 22 people were taken to the hospital. There's 2 considered missing right now, possibly 20, but 2 that they're very concerned about. The numbers, I don't think, are quite high enough to warrant a class action lawsuit. There will be definitely a number of lawsuits, but at this stage I don't see a class action.
Let's move over to this story about Scouts Canada. With all these reports, decades long, of sexual misconduct allegations. I'm not sure where this case is going to go, but how far back can they look as far as criminal charges?
Criminal charges in Canada, there is no statute of limitations, unlike civil actions. So they could go back 65 years and more. And there's a lot of merit to that. There are some problems with that, but there's a lot of merit to that. In this particular case, I understand there was over 100 new reports, or actually old reports that have come to light. And as I understand, out of those 100 thus far, new charges have already been laid in one case. Okay. So the police, who have all this new information, will be looking at each case, and wherever they can, I'm sure they will be laying a charge. So new charges may come out of this.
But again, when we look at a case like this where you've got allegations stemming back, you know,
so long.
60 years, are we then looking, we obviously don't have physical evidence, so it comes down to he said, she said.
Yes, and that often carries the day. Very often a victim of abuse will simply testify, tell their story. They've got no axe to grind, no motive to pursue.
As we saw in Sandusky, allegations that went back several years, and still you were able to find a conviction.
Exactly. I think there were at least 10 witnesses who testified that he abused them. And yeah, so it is quite possible. Justice can be served. It's unfortunate that the scouts themselves did not bring all this forward, and that a subsequent report had to bring more forward. But it seems right now that a thorough examination has been done, and it's all been brought to light. And they've put in place a structure to enhance transparency down the road.
Oh, lessons learned. Hindsight 2020. Thank you. I don't think we've heard the end of this one, Edward. All right, that is Edward Sapiano. He is a criminal defense lawyer here in Toronto and a regular contributor to our network.